Hello again. The film Everything, Everywhere, All at Once has been both a critical and box office success. Many have been greatly affected by it. I think that's because the movie's themes are incredibly relevant to the predicament that countless human beings find themselves in every day. For me, the film is an on-screen representation of the transcendent and absurdist journey that some spiritual folks call enlightenment, nirvana, or salvation, and Jungians call individuation. I feel compelled to talk about the film. I will break up my thoughts into 3 separate videos, each focusing on a specific theme. Please note that this is not meant to be a standard movie review or in-depth analysis film critique. If you're in need of such a review, here's a quick one. I highly recommend that people watch this film. It's probably my favorite film of all time. 2 thumbs up from me. Although I did see a few folks walk out of it, so it's not for everyone. If you haven't seen the film, don't watch this video. Go watch the movie. Okay, with all that said, let's get on with it. There's a whole host of transformational imagery in this film, which I could go into. That would take a long time. So in this video, I will specifically talk about how the film closely tracks the path of transcendence laid out in Eight Ciruit Yoga. Eight Ciruit Yoga is the framework that I use for understanding the process of yogic enlightenment. Most of us go through life feeling like the plant on the left. Eight Ciruit Yoga is meant to provide us with a framework for spending more of our lives like the plant on the right. The film's opening sequence introduces us to our protagonist Evelyn and her chaotic, miserable everyday life. This sequence is a perfect distillation of what I call the status quo. The status quo is made up of the first 4 circuits of an 8-circuit model. In the status quo, our everyday lives are basically determined by environmental influence and genetic predispositions. We're pretty much functioning like biological robots. The word robot has its root in the word slave. You could consider status quo life a form of slavitude to what psychologist C.G. Jung called the spirit of the times. Society and culture basically constitute a form of random programming. Each generation of human beings is programmed by the previous generation of human beings, who themselves were randomly programmed by their predecessors. Human beings go through their day-to-day lives somewhat confused, busy, rushing around in an attempt to achieve societal goals and maintain comfort and pleasure. We strive to achieve family goals. For Evelyn, that's making her father proud. That's having a daughter that looks and behaves how Evelyn wants her to. And that's having a husband that isn't a, quote, silly man. We strive to achieve our financial and business goals. For Evelyn, that's running her laundry business in a profitable fashion and successfully getting through the IRS audit she's dealing with. We want to celebrate our cultural heritage and share it with others. For Evelyn, that's inviting the community to her family's Lunar New Year celebration. And we try to squeeze in time for our hobbies. For Evelyn, that's a bunch of failed side projects. Most importantly, we strive to make others proud. We need others to love and respect us. This is what we think will make us happy. But unfortunately, as much as we try, this desire to get satisfaction out of the people, objects, and situations in our lives comes up empty. Evelyn is miserable. She's overwhelmed. She's run down. Her husband wants a divorce. Her daughter can't stand being with her. Her father doesn't respect her. Her business and personal property is on the verge of being taken away by the IRS. She lives in shame. This is the status quo for many of us. The first 4 circuits of the 8-circuit model are programmed or imprinted in such a way that our experience of life can be a misery. In Circuit 1, basic orientation, the world is either safe or unsafe. For Evelyn, it's clearly unsafe, and she's struggling to make it a world that she's comfortable in. Circuit 2 is emotional politics. Evelyn's perceived status within her family and society is pretty low, no matter how much she tries to bully others. In transactional analysis, you could probably categorize Evelyn somewhere between hostile strength and hostile weakness. She's often in the I'm not okay, you're not okay category. Circuit 3, symbolic reality. Evelyn is trapped by time. Time is running out. She's getting older, and her father is getting closer to death. There's not a lot of time left to make him proud. She's trapped by tax forms and literally surrounded by a mound of receipts. These are numbers and symbols that could destroy her and her family. Circuit 4, socio-sexual persona. Evelyn has become cold to her husband, who tries to show affection, but she cannot reciprocate. She's lost her erotic spark, her libido. Her daughter is a lesbian, and while Evelyn superficially approves, this is a sort of problem for her. Evelyn feels alienated. Her role as matriarch is trapping her in misery, and she feels the hallmark features of the socio-sexual circuit: shame and guilt. The status quo makes everyday life seem gray, mundane, monotonous, and meaningless. Worst of all, it makes all of us into metaphoric vampires who end up draining the life out of the people, objects, and situations in our lives for some little bits of pleasure. A great representation of that is the IRS auditor, who is portrayed as an almost sadistic, miserable gray lady. She's an antagonist whose inner pain causes her to spread pain to others. She's the first of several representations of the goddess archetype, a crone figure. She represents how Evelyn's world has become gray and vampiric. So how does Evelyn get out of this? She clearly works hard, she clearly loves her family, she clearly holds her cultural traditions important, she clearly doesn't want her business to fail, but none of what she's doing is working, no matter how hard she tries. No matter how hard she rushes around, barking orders, and trying to get everything done at once, Evelyn's attempt at being in control of everything in her life is a failure. Just when things are looking the most dire for her, with her daughter falling into nihilistic depression, her husband filing for divorce, the IRS taking away her business and personal assets, her father's health and respect for her in tatters, this is when the higher circuits activate. You see, nothing in the first lower 4 circuits will rescue her. She needs rescuing from outside of the status quo. In this film, that starts with Circuit 6. Evelyn is unexpectedly the recipient of an otherworldly communication. Since this film is set within a science fiction genre, the otherworldly entity is a multi-dimensional traveler communicating through the body of her husband. This is basically a form of spirit possession. In another narrative framework, we could easily call this entity an angel or fairy or demon from another world. C.G. Jung perhaps would call this the spirit of the depths, or her soul or unconscious mind speaking to her. This transcendent being has come into Evelyn's life to tell her that there are worlds beyond her world, levels of being that she could not normally comprehend. He shows her visions. She sees her entire life flashing before her eyes. She's moved to tears. But she's also disconcerted. She's in shock. She has no way to integrate this experience, and she tries to ignore and avoid it. Unfortunately, this otherworldliness escalates. It totally disrupts her day, and her life falls apart. This is an example of what a Circuit 6 experience can do to you if it's not properly integrated into your life. In fact, it's what all of the higher circuits can do to you if they're not properly, carefully activated and integrated into your life. So, how does Evelyn properly engage with this inner spirit, her soul, if you will? How does she gain access to this incredible transcendent multiverse in a stable way? Well, Evelyn gets down on her knees, and she fully embodies herself in the present moment, where time slows down. She then displays devotion by placing her hands in a traditional prayer pose. She genuinely finds it in herself to say "I love you" to the crone, her supposed enemy. She says "I love you" to this nasty representation of the gray vampiric world of suffering. Evelyn's initial attempts at doing this are pretty funny. She doesn't mean it, so it doesn't work. She doesn't get into the prayer pose. In fact, she's making the sign of the cross like one would use to repel a vampire. Things take a turn when Evelyn is cornered. The mood changes drastically. She doesn't surrender out of pure volition, but surrenders because she has seen there's no way out. There's no way out of the status quo, so she has no other choice. She surrenders and chooses genuine love in her final moments before annihilation. And this act of love and surrender allows Evelyn to properly activate the higher circuits, to begin her journey transcending the status quo. This is the journey of enlightenment, nirvana, salvation, or individuation. This journey can be understood as a process of activating the 4 higher circuits in the 8 circuit model. Circuit 5, Soma. This is the activation of the body's senses, resulting in one entering a state of peace, compassion, love, and hilarity. Circuit 6, extrasensory intelligences. This involves ongoing communication and establishing healthy relationships to beings that may only be real within one's conscious first-person experience. Circuit 7, alchemical co-creation. This involves the fusing of one's inner and outer worlds as one field of experience. Basically, waking life becomes dreamlike, fluid, and full of allegorical and metaphorical meaning. And lastly, Circuit 8, the non-local circuit. This involves the experience of knowing that who you are extends far beyond the human body. This is a unity with all things far beyond anything you've ever experienced in your status quo life. This unity is comprised of pure, true love. The choice to stop and surrender is a critical message in Eight Ciruit Yoga. Any attempt to activate the higher circuits without surrender will yield terrible results. Part 2 of this video series will explore the utter absurdity that comes with activation of the higher circuits. Part 3 of the series will focus on Circuit 8 and further discuss the role that love plays in all of this. But for now, let's skip to the end of the film. Once Evelyn has fully understood the implications of what has happened to her, this yogic journey that she's been on, once she's had a revelation of love and infinite being, Evelyn transforms from a miserable housewife living a mundane existence into a bodhisattva figure. In Eight Ciruit Yoga, I discuss various names for the bodhisattva figure across cultures. But in essence, a bodhisattva is a powerful, enlightened being who is able to reach nirvana, but delays doing so out of compassion, love, and service for others that are suffering. Evelyn becomes a fully enlightened, all-powerful mother goddess, a representation of Guanyin. In Chinese mythology, Guanyin is the goddess of mercy and is considered to be the embodiment of compassion, in contrast to her daughter Joy, who is a representation of a more destructive form of the goddess, like Kali. Guanyin is an all-seeing, all-hearing being. Evelyn's transformation is sealed and announced when she makes a powerful statement to Joy, using her otherworldly power of compassion. She says, "Stop calling me Evelyn. I am your mother." At the climax of the film, Evelyn spreads her love, compassion, and service throughout all of existence in all of her incarnations. Later, in the final moments of the film, we find Evelyn and her family back to their everyday lives. While all the problems they were facing at the beginning of the film aren't magically fixed, Evelyn has been deeply transformed by the activation of the higher circuits and her transcendent experiences. Evelyn has rooted herself in something deeper than the status quo, an all-powerful love and unity beyond rational comprehension. Evelyn is no longer dull and withering like the plant on the left. She's fully alive, like the plant on the right. Evelyn has transcended and transformed the status quo. She feels love again. That brings us to the end of this video. See you in part 2.